Hey everyone, welcome back to the 5 p.m. podcast. It's January 22nd, 2025, and we're diving into a doozy today.
You can say that again, Dan. I'm Tina, and folks, we need to talk about these pardons. President Trump just pardoned nearly everyone involved in the January 6th Capitol riot.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. We're talking over 1,500 people who were charged, right? And a huge chunk of them either pleaded guilty or were found guilty in court.
Exactly. And it's not just a slap on the wrist type of situation. We're talking about serious stuff here. Assault, rioting, the whole 9 yards. Remember, around 140 law enforcement officers were injured that day.
Oh man, I was just reading this article from ABC News, and they quoted this former prosecutor, Alexis Loeb. She was the deputy chief of the Capitol Breach Section. She said the pardons were disturbing.
Disturbing is an understatement. What about the officers who were hurt, who testified, who had to go through all of that? It just feels, dismissive?
Right? Loeb was saying it's like the
And what's interesting is House Speaker Mike Johnson. He's on the other side of this. He's basically saying, hey, the president has the power to pardon. It's his call.
Yeah, he brought up this idea that peaceful protesters shouldn't be punished. But wasn't the whole point that January 6th wasn't exactly a peaceful protest? People were injured.
That's the thing that gets me. It feels like we're rewriting history here. Like, are we just going to forget that there was violence? That people were trying to overturn an election?
And Johnson also mentioned something about the Justice Department being weaponized, which, is a whole other can of worms.
It's a loaded term, for sure. It implies that the prosecutions were politically motivated, which, there were a lot of people involved in those cases. Are we saying they were all biased?
It makes you wonder what the criteria were for these pardons. Like, was there a review process? Was each case looked at individually? Or was it just a blanket pardon for everyone involved?
That's a great question. And what kind of message does this send? If you're upset with an election, is it okay to storm the Capitol now? Because it seems like the consequences aren't so severe anymore.
It's kind of like, when you see those historical dramas, and there's always that one scene where someone gets granted clemency at the last minute? It feels like that, but on a massive scale.
Right? Except in those dramas, there's usually a really good reason for the pardon, like new evidence came to light, or the person was wrongly accused. I'm not seeing that here.
This is what gets me. Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution gives the president the power to pardon. But this feels different. It's not just about forgiving a crime. It feels like it's condoning it.
That's a really interesting way to put it. And then there's the whole rule of law aspect. The idea that everyone, even people in power, are supposed to be accountable to the law. Does this erode that principle?
Oh, for sure. If the law doesn't apply equally to everyone, then what's the point? It creates different sets of rules depending on who you are or who you support.
And what about public trust? If people start to believe that the justice system is rigged or unfair, that's a dangerous path. It's like, what are we, the Wild West?
It's concerning, no doubt. And then, if you think about the future, could this embolden people to do something similar again? It's like, it sets a precedent,
I've been seeing a lot of chatter about that online, actually. People are worried that this is just going to encourage more political violence, not less.
Yeah, social media is blowing up about this. It's a really divisive issue. You've got some folks celebrating the pardons, and others who are, they're furious.
Compared to other presidential pardons throughout history, this one really stands out, doesn't it? It's not just the number of people, but the context. It's tied to such a raw and divisive moment in our history.
I was just thinking about that. Usually, pardons are for, nonviolent offenses, or maybe someone who served their time and turned their life around. This feels so different.
It is different. It almost feels like we're living through a historical event that we'll be analyzing for years to come. Like, future generations are going to look back at this and try to make sense of it all.
Well, Tina, this has been a lot. I think we've just scratched the surface here, but it's definitely a conversation we need to keep having.
Agreed, Dan. And to our listeners, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on these pardons? Let us know on social media. We're at the 5 p.m. podcast.
Yeah, let's keep this dialogue going. Until next time, this is Dan, signing off.
And I'm Tina. Stay informed, everyone.